The village had no name, at least, none that outsiders remembered. It sat between wooded hills and a dried-up riverbed, choked with brambles and fog. A single cobbled road wound through it, lined with shuttered houses, their windows always dark, even by day. And every door bore the same mark above it, a black veil, hung like a warning. The villagers were kind enough, in the way the silent are. They nodded politely. They offered bread. But no one ever smiled. No one ever laughed. And no one ever spoke of the mask. It was a gravedigger who first broke the silence. His name was Lucien. He had worked the churchyard alone since he was 16. Now in his 40s, he still dug every grave by hand. Never faster. Never slower. He had rules. One spade width at a time. Cross the body's arms before lowering. Never look into the eyes. And always place the mourner's mask beside the head before burial. A custom, they said. A symbol of respect. But the mask was not meant for the dead. It was meant for the living. Black painted wood, smoothed by age. Hollow eyes. A mouth sewn shut with wire. Each time a villager died, the mask was worn by one of the mourners, chosen by draw of lot, to sit in silence during the night-long vigil beside the coffin. At dawn, the wearer would place the mask in the grave, speak one word, and walk away. The mask always returned to the church the next morning. Always clean. Always untouched. No one questioned it. Not until Lucien found the second mask. It happened during the burial of Émile Marchand, a man who hadn't spoken in 10 years. Lucien had just broken ground on the north edge of the cemetery, earth dry, almost brittle. As he worked, his spade hit something solid. He thought it a rock, until he cleared the dirt and found wood. Old wood. A coffin. Unmarked. Not listed in the cemetery book. Not buried with care. Inside, no body. Only a mask. Identical to the one used in every village funeral. Except this one wasn't black. It was white. And it was smiling. Lucien didn't tell the priest. He didn't log the grave. He buried Émile Marchand in another plot, filled the earth, and locked the white mask in his tool shed behind his cottage. But that night, he didn't sleep. Someone knocked at his door. 3 times. He opened it to find no one. But across the road, hanging from the gate of the cemetery, was the white mask, smiling, facing him, and beneath it, carved into the wooden gate, fresh and deep, "You wore it once. Now you must wear it again." Lucien didn't remember ever wearing the mask, not the black one, and certainly not the white. But the words carved into the gate echoed in his thoughts like the toll of a distant bell. "You wore it once. Now you must wear it again." He didn't touch the mask that night. He took it down, wrapped it in cloth, and buried it deep inside his tool shed beneath the coal pile. By morning, the carving on the gate had vanished. But the feeling hadn't. That week, no one in the village died. Which was strange, because someone always did. There were only 83 villagers. Most were old, ill, slowing down in body and breath. But now, they moved a little quicker, spoke a little less, eyes wide, hands wringing, always watching the chapel for signs of the next death. Nothing came, until the bell rang. 2 notes, low and long, the sign that another had passed. But no one came to the chapel. No family. No mourners. Just the priest, old Father Jacquet, waiting by the open coffin. waiting for the mask to be worn, waiting for the vigil to begin. And when Lucien passed by, shovel over his shoulder, the priest turned to him, hollow-eyed, and said, "It's your lot this time." Lucien tried to protest. He'd never been drawn. He wasn't family. He was the grave digger. That was his role. But Father Jacques only stared, and slowly raised his hand to point. On the coffin lid sat a folded scrap of paper. Lucien picked it up. On it, a name written in black ink, Lucien Dupré. Beneath it, a single word, again. That night, Lucien sat in the chapel, alone, wearing the black mask. He hadn't worn it since childhood. He remembered nothing of that night. But now, beneath the veil, behind the wires stretched across the lips, he felt it. A memory trying to rise. The coffin lay before him, closed, sealed with candle wax. The nameplate read, Colette Vernier, a woman Lucien barely knew. But as the candles burned low, and the wind slid through the stained glass seams, he began to hear something beneath the floorboards. A second breath. A second heartbeat. He tried to remove the mask. It wouldn't budge. The chapel darkened. And then, Colette's coffin creaked. The lid slowly, silently opened. Lucien could not stand, could not scream. He could only watch as the woman inside rose. Her face was pale. Her eyes were stitched shut. And in her hands, she held the white mask, smiling, waiting. She didn't speak. Colette Vernier, dead for 2 days, stood in the candlelit chapel with her eyes sewn shut and the white mask in her hands. The same mask Lucien had found buried. The same mask he had hidden beneath the coal pile. It was clean now, polished, and smiling. Lucien sat frozen in the mourner's chair, the black mask clamped to his face. He couldn't move, could barely breathe. His body obeyed the rite. His mind screamed. Colette took a step forward, then another. The chapel groaned beneath her feet, as if the stone itself recoiled. She raised the mask, and placed it gently on the coffin lid where she had lain. Then, still standing, she turned toward Lucien. He could feel it, even with her eyes shut. She was looking at him. The morning sun never came. The windows glowed pale, but no warmth touched the chapel floor. When the priest arrived, the candles were still burning. Lucien sat in silence. The black mask, still on his face. The white mask was gone. Father Jacques said nothing, only nodded. Lucien stood and left the chapel, breath shallow, the sound of stitched footsteps still echoing in his ears. That night, he returned to his shed. The coal pile was undisturbed, but the mask was no longer buried. It was hanging on the wall, just above his tools. Smiling, mocking, Lucien tried to burn it. He built a fire, laid it in the coals, closed the stove door. The flames roared. He didn't sleep. In the morning, the stove was cold. The fire was out. The mask sat untouched atop the ashes. Perfect, not even singed, and carved into the inside of the stove door. It does not burn. It remembers. That afternoon, Lucien returned to the old church records. Baptisms, marriages, deaths. He turned to the morning ledgers and found something he hadn't expected. A page from 30 years ago. A child's vigil. The name, Lucien Dupré. The chosen mourner, Lucien Dupré. He had worn the black mask for himself. and below the entry, written in a different hand, long faded. The boy did not die, but something was buried. That night, the chapel bell rang again, 3 times. No one answered it, except Lucien, and when he arrived, there were no coffins, no priest, only the white mask, resting in the mourner's chair, waiting for him to sit. Lucien stared at the white mask resting in the mourner's chair. It hadn't been placed there carelessly. It waited, upright, balanced, centered, as if positioned by unseen hands that knew the weight of ceremony. The chapel was silent. No coffins, no candles, no priest, just the mask and the echo of his name. He didn't want to sit, but he did. As he lowered himself into the chair, the air thickened, as though the chapel inhaled and held its breath. Lucien reached for the white mask. His fingers brushed its cold surface. And suddenly, he was no longer alone. The pews filled, not with the living, but with pale, unmoving figures. Their faces were waxy, frozen, their clothing out of place, stretched across decades. Each wore a mourning mask, black, cracked, with lips wired shut. But one among them, front row, center, wore no mask at all. A child, 8 years old, gaunt, gray-eyed, dressed in funeral black too large for his thin frame. He stared at Lucien, not with fear, with recognition. The boy mouthed a word. Lucien didn't hear it, but he knew what it was. Me. Memories rose like water. A coffin, far too small. Mourners dressed in silence. A priest who whispered prayers like apologies. And Lucien, as a child, chosen by the draw of lot to wear the black mask. He hadn't understood then, hadn't known the name on the coffin was his own. Declared dead after a fever. Breath slowed, heart quiet. But he had awoken in the coffin, screamed until the lid broke, crawled out covered in soil and wax. They had called it a miracle, but the rite had already begun. He had worn the mask. He had mourned himself. Back in the chapel, the child stood. The others stood with him, hundreds of masked mourners. The child reached into his coat pocket and drew out a second white mask, identical to the one Lucien now held. Then, together, the congregation began to move, marching silently down the aisle toward him. Lucien tried to rise. His legs refused. The white mask in his lap pulsed with cold. The child was almost upon him, and in that moment, Lucien saw what lay behind the stitched lips of every mask. Not mouths, eyes, watching, blinking, trapped. The child raised the second white mask, and for the first time, Lucien heard the faintest whisper, like wind through dry bone. We cannot be mourned twice. You took our place. You must return it. The child reached out. Lucien screamed, and awoke, alone in the chapel, drenched in sweat. But the chair was empty. No white mask, no pews of mourners, only silence, until he looked down at his hands, and saw what he was holding, a third mask, gray, neither black nor white, its mouth open, its eyes closed, its surface warm, and carved inside it, the final vigil has begun. Lucien didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, the gray mask resting before him. He hadn't made it. He hadn't found it. It had simply appeared, still warm, still breathing, its mouth open as if caught in a final word, its closed eyes twitching beneath the surface. Not carved, not painted, real. He wrapped it in cloth, tied it shut, locked it in the cellar. It didn't matter. When he woke, it was on the table again, waiting. Word spread quickly through the village, though no one ever spoke it aloud. That something was wrong with Lucien. He walked like a mourner between vigils. He spoke only to himself. Children saw him whispering into the well. Once, he was found staring into the chapel's empty pulpit, lips moving, hands shaking. And always, the mask nearby, never carried, never worn, but never far. On the 6th night, the bell rang again, but not the chapel bell, the one no one touched anymore, the bell of the crypt, buried beneath the church, sealed by stone and forgotten rites. Only 3 people in the village even knew it still existed. Lucien was one of them. He had helped bury it 30 years ago, the night he was buried. He lit a lantern and descended the stone steps beneath the altar. The air was thick with damp and dust. Cobwebs clung like lace. The door at the bottom, iron-banded oak, stood open. It should have been impossible. Inside, the walls of the crypt were lined with shelves, urns, old bones, funeral books, crumbling wreaths. And in the center, a stone slab, laid atop it, the child, the same boy from the vigil, still, silent, mouth stitched shut. On his chest, the white mask. But when Lucien stepped forward, the child sat up, eyes still shut, hands raised, and pointed, slowly, unshaking, at Lucien's chest. Lucien looked down. The gray mask was no longer in his hand. He was wearing it. He hadn't lifted it, hadn't touched it, but it clung to him now, flesh to flesh, the open mouth aligned with his own, the sealed eyes like lids over his sight, and through it he heard the child's voice, not a whisper, but a chorus of all the masks he had ever buried. "We are not the dead. We are the silenced, and you are the last mourner." The lantern flickered, the tomb dimmed, and somewhere beneath the crypt floor, another bell began to toll. But no one had ever built a second bell. Lucien turned. The child had vanished. Only the white mask remained on the stone slab, now smiling again. No one remembered a second bell. Not in the blueprints of the chapel. Not in the priest's records. Not in the old stone ledgers carved into the village's only monument. But Lucien heard it. And once you hear a funeral bell in the dark, it hears you back. He stumbled from the crypt at dawn, the gray mask gone, though he still felt its shape pressed against his face. Phantom flesh, tight as breath. In his mind, the child's voice still echoed. "You are the last mourner." That day, no one spoke to Lucien. Not because of fear, because of recognition. One by one, they lowered their eyes as he passed. They turned away, not with shame, but reverence. Not sorrow, but relief. They had been waiting, not for death, but for him. At dusk, Lucien returned to the crypt. This time, he brought a chisel, a crowbar, and 2 oil lanterns. He lit both, placed one on the slab beside the white mask, and began to search. He knocked along the floor stones, one by one. When he struck the 17th tile, the sound changed, hollow, deep, like the tone of a bell covered by soil. He pried it up. Below, dirt, black and wet. He dug with his hands, then with the crowbar, then with nothing but desperation, until the crowbar hit metal. Bell metal. He cleared the dirt. A bell, small, tarnished, with no clapper, but not broken. Attached to it was a chain, a long, iron chain that disappeared into the earth. He pulled it. It didn't move. He pulled again. Still nothing. Then, a breath, cold, from below, and behind him, the white mask fell from the slab with a shatter. Except, it hadn't hit the ground. It had fallen into another hand. Lucien turned. The child stood once more. But now, he was not alone. The chapel above them was gone. The crypt was gone. Lucien stood in a vast underground space lined with arches of bone and flickering lanterns. Hundreds of figures surrounded him. All wore masks. Black, white, and gray. The child stepped forward, held out the shattered mask. Its pieces reassembled in the air, clicking into place like a puzzle of breath and bone. But now, the mask was different. Not black, not white, not gray. It was clear. And behind it, Lucien saw something he hadn't seen since he was a boy. His own face, unburied, unaged, still waiting. The child said nothing, but every masked figure raised a hand and pointed. Down. To the bell. To the chain. Lucien understood. It wasn't the dead who needed to be mourned. It was the mourners. All of them. Every villager who had ever worn the mask and walked away. Lucien gripped the chain and began to pull. The bell stirred. The ground trembled. And far above, the black veils hanging on every door in the village began to flutter, even though there was no wind. The bell had no voice. Not yet. Lucien stood waist-deep in the open pit beneath the crypt, hands raw, arms trembling as he pulled the chain link by link from the earth. The masked congregation watched in silence from the stone archways around him, unmoving, an audience of the forgotten. Above them, the walls of the crypt pulsed like a living lung. Still, the bell would not ring. In the village, time faltered. The sun never truly rose. Clock stuck at 3:17 a.m. Candles refused to burn. And no one died. Old Madame Rousseau collapsed on her doorstep, heart clenched, eyes open, but her body would not still. Her lips twitched, murmuring prayers with no breath. Her blood would not cool. She did not live. But she did not pass. Not until the bell rang. Lucien felt it in his bones. A truth spoken not in words, but in memory. Each death denied binds the veil tighter. Each mourner spared feeds the chain. He had thought the ritual was a way of honoring the dead. He had been wrong. It was a sacrifice, a transfer. Each time someone donned the black mask and sat vigil, the death meant for the coffin slipped past it and into the wearer. But the cost didn't come at once. It accumulated, and now it had returned. He pulled the final length of chain free. It ended not in a clapper, but in a mouth. Flesh and teeth and bone, fused in metal, jaws parted just enough to scream. But no sound came. Not yet. The clear mask in Lucien's hands began to tremble. The child, the one who bore his name and never grew, spoke again. But now the voice echoed with every mourner who had ever worn a mask. To ring the bell, you must enter it. Lucien understood. The congregation parted. At the far end of the chamber, an arch opened, black, curved like the mouth of the bell itself. He walked toward it, clear mask in hand. Behind him, the white mask and black mask fused into one and crumbled. The gray mask dissolved. Only the clear mask remained. The final veil. Within the archway, there were no walls, only mist, and the whisper of voices not yet mourned. He stepped inside, placed the mask on his face, and became still. The bell screamed, not with metal, but with every soul denied their death. Far above, in the village, Madame Rousseau exhaled. The chapel's doors splintered open. The veils blew away like ash. And for the first time in 3 generations, someone died. The villagers gathered in silence. They knew what had happened. They knew what Lucien had done. And they knew it would not be him who returned. They buried no body. Lucien had vanished. The crypt door sealed itself with the dawn. The bell went quiet, and death returned to the village. But it returned differently. Now, when a villager passed, there were no lots drawn, no black masks, no silent vigils. The dead simply lay still, and the mourners simply mourned. And beneath it all, deep below the chapel stones, something watched, not with malice, not with hunger, but with duty. The clear mask remained in the crypt, resting on the bell. It pulsed faintly with each new death. It glowed when grief was honest. It flickered when someone lied at a funeral. And when the bell rang now, it didn't chime through stone. It rang inside the mourner's ears. A sound no longer bound to chains. A sound pulled from within. Some said they saw him, from time to time, Lucien, in the chapel doorway just after dusk, in the window of the gravedigger's cottage, long abandoned, never moving, never speaking, just watching, masked in clear glass, his face lit with candlelight from somewhere that no longer burned. One day, a child wandered into the cemetery. He had not been born when Lucien vanished. He followed the rows of mossy stone, drawn by the whisper of the bell. At the far wall of the graveyard, beneath a dead tree, he found a new headstone. It had no name, no date, only an engraving of a mask, half black, half white, fused down the center. And beneath it, a single phrase carved in clean letters. He mourned for us all. The child blinked, looked again. Now the mask on the stone was clear, and it was smiling. That night, the bell rang once more, just once. But it wasn't a death. It was a summons. The bell had not rung for 6 months. Not since Lucien vanished. Not since the veil lifted. Not since death came back. So when it rang once, soft, low, and unmistakably clear, every candle in the village guttered. There was no funeral, no corpse, no coffin, only a child standing in the cemetery, staring at the headstone that now bore a smiling, clear mask. His name was Elias. He was 8 years old, the same age Lucien had been when he first wore the mask. Elias didn't run. He didn't scream. He simply followed the sound. Down the gravel path, through the chapel's doors, now always open, past the altar and into the shadows behind it. A door had appeared in the wall. A door that wasn't there before. It was carved from coffin wood, iron-banded, breathing. He touched it. It opened, and the child stepped into the stairwell leading down into the earth. No one stopped him. The villagers stood in their windows, behind shutters and glass, whispering the old words from the old rite. The bell must ring. The chain must break. The mask must pass. No one had spoken those words in years, but every mouth knew them. Elias descended into the crypt. It had changed. The shelves were gone. The stone slab gone. Only mist and a wide black bell, half submerged in the earth. The bell had no clapper, only a space inside, hollow and warm, and beside it, resting gently on a folded shroud, was the clear mask. It pulsed with soft light, and beside it, Lucien, or what was left of him. His body was neither living nor dead, just still, as though waiting for a question that had never been asked. He looked at Elias, not with eyes, but with presence. Then he pointed to the mask, to the bell, to the space where a mourner sits. Elias picked up the mask. It was warm. It sighed in his hands, and it whispered a single word. Remember. He placed it over his face, and the bell began to ring. Above ground, in the village, every mirror cracked. Every clock reset. The black veils, long torn and forgotten, returned, fluttering from eaves and lintels. But this time, they did not mourn the dead. They honored the one who bears death so others may rest. In the crypt, the mist rose. The masked congregation stood once more, surrounding Elias in silence. And for the first time in 3 generations, a mourner was chosen freely. The bell no longer needed chains. It rang through the bones of the village, through stone and breath and time. When Elias placed the clear mask over his face, the crypt did not seal. It opened, wider than before, beyond arches, beyond memory, beyond death. Lucien stood beside him, unchanged, no older, no weaker, but thinner, like light reflected off still water. A remnant, a guide. He had not been trapped. He had been waiting, waiting for someone who wouldn't wear the mask because they were chosen, but because they chose. The congregation of mourners bowed as Elias stepped forward. Their masks, black, white, gray, fell from their faces and cracked upon the stone floor. Their faces beneath were not twisted, nor hollow, only tired, relieved. One by one, they turned to dust, ashes curling upward into the lantern-lit vault, until only Elias remained. He stepped into the bell. It was no longer metal. It was memory, woven in the shape of a toll. Inside, the mask clung to him, melted into skin, became breath. And in the silence after the final echo, Elias saw. He saw the first mourner, a woman wrapped in burial silk, chosen to keep death from claiming her only son. She wore a mask of black clay and sat vigil for 7 days. When she removed it, her child awoke, but she was no longer alive. She had become the rite. He saw generations, each with their own mourner. Each time a bell rang, the chain lengthened. Each mask added weight, until Lucien, who broke the cycle by remembering what everyone else forgot, that death, unacknowledged, does not sleep. It waits. Elias did not wait. He whispered the words etched into the veil of the mask, not the old rite, not the borrowed prayer, his own vow. I will carry your names. I will speak what others won't. I will mourn without forgetting. And the veil dissolved. The bell shattered. The crypt cracked open, and light spilled through the chapel floor. When the villagers entered the church that morning, the altar was gone. In its place, a small stone pedestal. No door, no stairs, no mask, only a book, its pages blank, waiting to record the names of those who pass. Not for silence, but for memory. The villagers understood. The ritual was over. But the mourning would continue. Not in masks, not in chains, in truth, in choice. And sometimes, when the wind shifts across the graveyard, children say they hear a sound beneath the earth. Not a scream, not a cry, a bell, ringing not for death, but for the one who chooses to remember.